Good afternoon, everyone. We're going to go ahead and get started in one more minute. We're going to start promptly at 3, and then we'll take it out from there. Good afternoon, everyone. Thank you for joining us today for the first webinar in learning how to apply digital technology to HIV community planning. This webinar is the first webinar, a part of our webinar series entitled Effectively Engaging Community in Ending the HIV Epidemic Process Through Digital Technology. My name is Christina Santana from NAFCAT, and I am joined by my colleagues Nicole Elmanoff and Brushab Shah. This webinar is scheduled to last for 1 hour. If you have joined via the GoToWebinar link, you should see an introductory slide on your screen. However, if you do not see it, please use the chat feature to let us know, and me or one of my colleagues will try to troubleshoot the issue. Please note that after this introduction, I will be muting all lines to ensure good sound quality. We will engage in a question and answer period at the end of the webinar, at which time I will then unmute all the lines. However, if throughout the webinar you do have questions, please utilize the question feature located in the toolbar on your screen. And this webinar will be recorded and will be made available to you all. Before we get started, I do know that some of our partners from CDC wanted to welcome everyone, so I wanted to see if they were on the line. Maria or Erica, are you on the line? Okay. I'm not hearing them, so maybe they'll be able to join after a couple minutes, and then we can pass it on over to them. For now, I'm going to mute all lines, and then we'll go ahead and get started. Today's webinar just wanted to present some of the objectives that we are going to be hitting on for today's webinar. The first is to understand the principles and importance of meaningful community engagement. We also want to learn how digital technology is incorporated into the everyday lives of society. We want to identify where digital technology can support community engagement. And lastly, learn how some of our peers are integrating digital technology and digital platforms into their HIV community efforts. So I'm going to pass it on over to my colleague, Nicole, who's going to go over what meaningful engagement, community engagement looks like.
Great. Can everyone hear me? Can you hear me?
Yes.
Okay, excellent. Thank you so much, Christina, and good afternoon, everyone. Thank you so much for joining us. So today we're going to be talking about what is meaningful community engagement. Next slide. So before we really dive into what meaningful engagement is, let's establish some definitions on who the community is and what we mean by engagement. So the definition of community engagement that we'll be working with today is the process of working collaboratively with and through groups of people affiliated by geographic proximity, special interest, or similar situations to address issues affecting the well-being of those people. So community is different from population, as community is a self-identifier. So someone might say, I belong to this community. For example, the LGBTQ plus community. It's an inclusive perspective and it's united, as opposed to a population being more external, uncoordinated, and exclusive. So now that we know a little bit about community, let's discuss engagement. Engagement is an ongoing process. It's not a one event that you can check a box and say, we've done that. It's ongoing and it must build on each other, being cumulative. And then ultimately, trust building. So how is our engagement building trust and collaboration, increasing coordination and communication? Next slide. So some community engagement principles. These were created and developed by the Kirwan Institute for Racial Justice at The Ohio State University. And so I'll be providing a little information about each of these principles. So for instance, set clear goals. One of these goals that we could relate to, especially in a time right now, is the ending the HIV epidemic. Ultimately, by 2025, we want to reduce new HIV cases by 75% and by 90% in 2030. So we have a clear goal. This is what we are all working towards as a community. But now let's learn about the community that we really need to engage with in order for us to actually achieve these goals. So what are the community's strengths? What about barriers experienced? Perhaps you attend a community event as a guest and enter with a sense of humility and awareness of potential power dynamics due to race, maybe your position within an organization, your ethnic group, citizenship, class, gender differences. These are all some examples of power dynamics that appear when entering into a space. Developing cultural humility by building an awareness of and mutual respect for cultural differences, attitudes, practices, and histories, and establishing behaviors that demonstrate a commitment towards increasing community agency for change. Really creating a space where, as a community, we could all learn and grow together, but ultimately knowing that there's a lifelong commitment to learning about different cultural groups and just ultimately having that growth mindset for continued learning and growth. Foster transparency. So creating community agreements at the beginning of meetings and being transparent about motives and power dynamics. You know, what's the purpose of us being in this space? So for instance, if we're creating goals for or activities for our ending the epidemic plan, you know, how is that coming across to the community? Does the community think that this is actually their plan that they're developing, or a plan that they're contributing to, but ultimately the powers that be will decide what's going on? So really having that transparency conversation about what's going on with that information. Ultimately, representation matters, and create opportunities for community leaders to facilitate or lead meetings. Have individuals be forward facing because representation matters and can help create more of a space where people feel comfortable to share their ideas. Promote capacity building, really invest in community. So maybe there's a community leader that you think could be a really great candidate for a scholarship or like a leadership institute. Maybe write them a letter of recommendation and really help invest and provide opportunities. And ultimately, with building partnership and trust and maintaining long-term commitment, honor the wisdom, voice, and experience of the community. Treat these participants with integrity and respect, share decision-making and leadership, and engage in continuous reflection and willingness to change course. So next slide. Ultimately, as far as a mindset, this is heard a lot, is the this population or community is hard to reach. Maybe we can frame this thought into some other questions. So are people truly hard to reach? Or maybe the services are hard to access. What time are services being offered? Is the location close to a bus line? What are informal or formal activities that happen in the community within a given year? You know, maybe there's a community event that is well known. This could be an opportunity to partner with someone from that community. How can we include more communities' perspectives earlier in the planning and decision-making process? Ultimately, when creating these plans, having community involved at every step of the way, from the creation of the planning group to delivering content, every step of the way. Where are informal meeting spaces in communities? So are there some drop-in centers? Are there different hangout spots? Does our perception or history inhibit outreach and engagement? And this is definitely a point of reflection. How does the history of our organization or space have, and how have they impacted the different communities in either a positive or negative way? Next slide. And ultimately, building a relationship before the public health and really remembering the public in public health. Strong communities create strong programs. Really having a strong community can help when making your goals achievable and developing a strong program. Center outreach as a process, it's an ongoing effort, and sometimes things take place, but it really needs to be consistent. So let's say something takes place like our COVID-19 pandemic. You know, how can we center our outreach in a different way that's still consistent? Communicate a clear understanding of how you define engagement and the intended execution. Really make sure that the way that you're communicating is also in line with how the community responds. So maybe communicate through social media outreach. Listen to the needs of the community to collectively prioritize the needs. You know, what one individual might, you know, an individual at a health department setting or in a leadership position might consider a priority, but that might not align with the community's ideas of priorities. How can we collectively prioritize the needs? Establish what transparency looks like at the very beginning. Create accountability structures. So when having these meetings, discuss different structures that can be put in place for the accountability process. So, you know, is there an action item? Are people clearly aware of what tasks they have to complete? And ultimately, again, incorporate the community through the whole process. Having meaningful community engagement really relies on intentionality, and keeping the community throughout the whole process can really help with intentional community engagement. So now my co-worker Rushab Shah will be discussing where digital technology fits in with community engagement.
Hi, Ver, can you hear us?
Hi, thank you. I apologize. I don't know why it wasn't letting me unmute. All right, thank you so much, Nicole, and hello, everyone. My name is Rushab Shah. I'm a manager on the prevention team at NASTAD, and I'm going to talk a little bit about how digital technology fits in with community engagement. So next slide, please. So, over the course of the next couple of minutes, we're, going to cover a general overview of what digital technology looks like, kind of how it's being used and what impact it can have as a primary tool for community engagement. And we can really talk about this for a number of minutes, number of hours even, since this is a large topic. But while there are several aspects of this space that can be really meticulously unpacked over that time frame, we're going to focus primarily on how these tools operate in reaching communities, and how their utility in a world with COVID-19 has really increased significantly. Like I said, and like Christina had said earlier, in the upcoming webinar as part of our series, we'll hone in on specific strategies and different platform options that can be explored to cultivate a more targeted, multi-factored approach to community engagement. And so, definitely look out for that. But we'll start today with kind of the broad level macro scale look at how digital technology, what it is, and how it can really impact this work. Next slide, please. So again, to kick us off, when we think about digital technology from a definitional standpoint, we're looking kind of at the scientific or engineering knowledge and application that deals with the creation and practical use of digital or computerized devices, methods, systems to generate, process, or store data. And so, this is really a large space that is a large kind of forum for us to kind of delve into different pieces of engagement. This is a place that can be leveraged to accomplish a whole number of goals. We've seen kind of digital technology explode since the early 2000s tech boom, and it has shown no signs of slowing down. What's really exciting here is how digital technology has allowed so many of us to experience and perform activities that we weren't able to in the past. These include FaceTime, group chats, kind of posting pictures on social media, and really using it as a tool to broadcast advocacy campaigns and social change campaigns as well. And while there are still a significant amount of challenges with connectivity, access, and usage, we know from the data that digital technology is here to stay and likely going to be an integral part of everyday life for most Americans. What we really want to hone in on is that digital technology is considered more of an umbrella term for online, internet, virtual, e-learning, distance learning, forums and mediums. And it's kind of the aggregate of all of those that we can really tap into to see how community engagement can be expanded, to see how community engagement can be challenged in its old ways of operation, as well as kind of what the gaps currently exist to bridge those two historical and present day moments. Next slide, please. So I want to turn briefly to the distinction that's kind of hard to parse out when you think about it, but very important to note when it comes to digital technology spaces. And that's the difference between virtual and online spaces. So when we think about an online space, we're typically operating, kind of using an external server and internet access, but no software. And so a great example of this is YouTube, Facebook, Google. These are places that you can go using the internet. You can access it because it's an external server. This is not something that's built into your computer. And you don't need a software that you have to download. You don't have to install anything. You put it into the URL. You're part of the World Wide Web, and you're unofficially a platform that's considered online. And so this has been huge because online connectivity is really how the digital technology boom started. This was where things were kind of slow in the beginning. We didn't really see what was going to happen with it. But as a larger and larger volume of folks found credibility and utility in it, we've seen platforms like Facebook, YouTube, Instagram, and Google, to name a few, really explode. On the other hand, we have virtual spaces, and these are also very similar. The only distinction is that they would be including a installable software. So, we are on a virtual space right now. GoToWebinar is a platform and a software that you typically have to have a license for and download. Similar to this is Zoom or WebEx or GoToMeeting. These are kind of virtual places that folks can really come together to meet and collaborate on. And these are traditionally places where we don't think of folks engaging on the World Wide Web or on digital technology, but these are becoming now a lot more pronounced. And so with the COVID-19 pandemic, for example, we're seeing a lot more folks really migrating into these spaces. We've seen it, in fact, in the last couple of months, just completely explode to have, places to learn new skills, leverage kind of networking capabilities, and then also just share meaningful presentations, kind of like what we're doing together today. And so we anticipate that this is going to be a massive space that's going to balloon over the next couple of months and certainly years. And the kind of interesting piece about this is we don't know whether online or virtual spaces are going to kind of compete to take over the other, but we know right now that they're working in tandem to really help out a lot of folks get connected and get the work done that they have to get done. Next slide, please. So I want to dive now into some of the data that we've been able to kind of collect behind usage. And I want to really spend time talking about some really incredible work that's been done with some of our partners, as well as some of the research institutes who are very credible in this space. So, first off, I want to talk about kind of the number of folks who really go online and use digital technology on a day-to-day basis. The Pew Research Center did a large survey and that found that overall about 81% of Americans say they go online on a daily basis. That figure includes the 28% who go online almost constantly, as well as the 45% who say they go on several times a day, and 9% who go online about once a day. In addition, we can also kind of see here that there's about some 8% who go online several times a week or less often, while another 10% of adults say they do not use the internet at all. Adults with mobile connectivity are especially likely to be online a lot. And among mobile internet users, the 86% of Americans who use the internet, at least occasionally using the smartphone, 92 go online daily and 32% go online almost constantly. So in all, we must really recognize how integral digital technology has been in the lives of numerous populations prior to COVID, and now how it's only going to get more and more prevalent. These are striking numbers. Typically, we don't see such a stark difference between folks doing a certain behavior versus another in most research studies and surveys. And so we know that this is an important statistic and point of measure that we want to look at, and certainly one that I think really paints an accurate picture of where digital technology is going to really hammer home for community engagement. Next slide, please. So we can continue this data really looking at, cell phone use. So the vast majority of Americans, about 96%, now own a cell phone of some kind. And the share of Americans that own smartphones is now 81%, up from just 35% in Pew's first survey of smartphone ownership conducted in 2011. So a growing share of Americans now use smartphones as their primary means of online access at home. Today, we know that roughly 1 in 5 American adults are smartphone-only internet users, meaning that they own a smartphone, but do not have a traditional home broadband service. And so we, have kind of data that we've been able to gather here, parsed out by different kind of variables to see, what percentage of adults do not use broadband at home but own smartphones. And so really showing us how smartphone dependent folks are becoming over a period of time. And so to start, you can see here that the largest kind of age group of folks by age over the past 6 years that has been dependent on smartphones is the youngest among us. Today, they would be classified as Gen Z, with some folks in the millennial generation. We have folks above them, just older than them, again, 30 to 49, using a little bit less. And as you go higher and higher up in age, you see lower usage. If you go to the next slide, I believe you'll see the next kind of indicator that we're using, which is by race. Also very interesting here, we see Black and Brown, Black and Hispanic folks really being the top users of smartphones ahead of the white community. And the white community over the past couple of years has really stayed flat on this piece. So we see that this is growing. It is decreasing with the Hispanic community. However, we look forward to seeing data this coming year, which might indicate that it will be increasing generally over the large period of time. The next kind of indicator that we looked at was kind of community settings. So this was an interesting one to really parse out. We have urban, suburban, and rural, and they all kind of followed the same trajectory. This will be really interesting to see now in light of COVID, to see where things kind of move as folks have moved back home. Some folks have left urban centers. Rural communities are in dire need already of broadband services, but they are going to be seeing a large uptick in folks potentially moving in. So we have a lot of moving variables that definitely are going to shift as a result of COVID. So we'll want to keep an eye on this piece of data just to keep track of where things go. And the last kind of indicator we used was income. And here you can see, again, a really clear distinction between different income groups, the lowest being at the highest percentage of US adults who use smartphones and who are dependent, on smartphones. And then the folks making about above 75K are those more at the bottom. And so, this is an interesting statistic here too. There's a number of reasons we can really attribute to these gaps. And we can really say that there's a number of gaps that are continuing to grow between these different indicators. But what we know although we can't really parse out what these specific reasons are without really going into several layers of detail, we do know that these gaps are widening and likely to be more exaggerated with time. And so again, something we want to keep a lookout at, see how this is changing over the next couple of years, and really try to understand where these health statistics are coming from. Next slide. So another kind of piece of utility that we'll all want to consider when it comes to community engagement is kind of, along with mobile phones, Americans are also owning a range of other information, getting a range of other information from a number of devices. So nearly 3/4 of US adults now own a desktop or laptop computers, while roughly half now own tablet computers, and roughly another half own e-reader devices. So we really want to highlight how there are emerging markets in digital technology that are going to become more pronounced and centered in the coming years. Again, with COVID, we're going to see a lot more folks coming onto digital spaces. And so we'll want to keep an eye out, especially with e-readers, tablet computers, what things are going to look like with this space, especially since, digital laptop computer ownership is kind of remaining flat over the past couple of years. So part of part of this is going to include an acknowledgement that we're seeing a lot of different pieces and software coming onto these platforms, and so we want to make sure that we are nimble and open to this. A huge piece, a social media space that's coming up right now is TikTok. This is completely upending the social media space for a number of folks and becoming a huge norm with younger adults and millennials alike. So where those software pieces kind of land in this kind of device marketplace is going to be something to always keep an eye out for, because it'll be key to definitely engaging unique populations. Next slide, please. Excuse me. So I won't go and belabor us again with the details of the data. I kind of just went through this, but again, I want to really highlight, a vast majority of the folks with internet connectivity are consuming information online. We have to be very sensitive to where they're consuming information online, if it's in a virtual or online space, what those applications look like, and who we really need to target. We know 96% of Americans own a cellular device of some kind. and we want to be really creative about what we do on those devices to target those communities. Are there specific communities that have specific cellular devices? Are there applications on those devices that we need to leverage to really access these folks who we're not reaching? Considerations like this are going to become paramount as we see more of the community translate over into this space. And kind of lastly, there are still about 1 in 10 adults who never really go online to consume information. That has been a sharp decline over a small period of time. We saw that kind of with the first graph with Pew, and so it's going to be critical to think about every new space, every new forum will always have folks who come and folks who don't come, whether they can't access it or whether they opt out. And we, it's incumbent on us to be very nimble to what are their needs, figuring out how to access them, what are some points of entry that we might not have thought about, and being creative and realizing that that creativity lends itself to better health outcomes in the long term. Next slide, please. So I want to just kind of spend a couple of minutes. I know we're tight on time. I just want to really hammer this home in terms of some of the benefits that we can see with community engagement. So we can really focus on 3 main buckets where digital technology can really be a helpful tool. With electronic services versus in-person services, we can really be very tailored with how we outreach and anticipate what pieces of the puzzle have to be included. This is sometimes harder to do in person when you have to think on the fly, you have to think in person with the kind of folks in the room. This gives you a lot of efficiency to really plan ahead and make sure that folks are having their needs met. And in addition, electronic services gives jurisdictions the freedom to kind of target communities who may have opted out or could not be reached with an in-person engagement. This gives us tremendous new directions and opportunities to really tap into communities that have been historically left out or neglected. Secondly, digital technology can be a really, really helpful tool to co-produce and co-organize collective action across jurisdictions to kind of better meet the needs of the moment. Having the ability to bring multiple people in the same room without the hassle of travel, materials, or other logistics having to be coordinated really improves the probability that more folks may be willing to participate and work together to engage the needs of that community. And finally, community voices in jurisdictions can have a really great opportunity today to hold each other accountable through transparency. Digital technology allows information to be publicly available and accessible in a singular forum most of the time. And this means community can speak truth to power when they need it from jurisdictions and work collaboratively work collaboratively in one time point to better determine how needs will be met in an effective way. This cuts back on meetings, oftentimes negotiations or conversations that happen behind closed doors, and decisions can be sometimes left unchecked or left unaccountable. So this really helps kind of all parties involved to get their foot in the same room. Next slide. So, lastly, I just want to hark on some of the big advantages and challenges that we can have with this kind of work. So, there's a lot of different opportunities to connect and engage, as we've discussed. This allows folks to gather in spaces for robust involvement. Folks can really talk through different things all at one time, in real time, in one place. This therefore lends itself to easy kind of follow-up and monitoring. You can promote these meetings, you can promote this work in a more holistic way. This kind of work, going on a GoToMeeting is free, it's open, folks can come on, leave when they want. This really gives folks it really appreciates where folks can be met and allows many more people to come on when they might have otherwise opted not to. And again, it can be a one-stop shop. There's a lot of really great virtual and online spaces. We'll talk more about this in our next webinar that can be a resource to do trainings, to provide surveys, to do quizzes. you can have a one-stop shop and get everything you need out of that one virtual space instead of having to go to 6 different meetings in a city and then have to coordinate all of that at one time. And the challenges come as well, and so these have to be weighed. So this can be time insensitive. You always have to be on the screen. Zoom fatigue and GoToWebinar fatigue is a real obstacle that a lot of folks in jurisdictions have been reporting back on. We know that there's a lot of separate planning that has to go into this, budgeting, training, data collection can be really cumbersome. And the fact that this technology is constantly shifting, constantly evolving, really makes it hard to stick to one platform. So, we want to be aware of these things, but see where we can really leverage the advantages to really get as many folks into this forum as possible. So I'll pause there. I'm going to turn it over now to Christina to kind of introduce our speakers, but we'll leave some time at the end of this call for some questions and answers. Thank you, everyone.
Thank you, Rushav. Before we turn it over to our speakers, I believe our CDC partners are on the line, so I wanted to give them the opportunity to speak. Maria or Erica, can you hear us? Erica, I see you on. I muted your line in case you're able to speak. I can try unmuting us all to see if Maria, you're able to join. Maria, can you hear us? Okay. Well, we'll keep trying, and we'll see if at the end of this we can get them on the line. So now I'm going to pass it on over and introduce our speakers. We are pleased to welcome Gina D'Angelo from Connecticut Department of Health, as well as Yasmin Andre and Andres Acosta from Heart of Florida United Way. First, we are going to hear from Gina, who's going to be talking about how they are using their web-based platform to maintain HIV planning council meetings. And then next, Yasmin and Andres will talk about how they are using Zoom to engage communities who are both English-speaking and Spanish-speaking for EHE planning. I will now, Gina, you should be unmuted, and I welcome you to take over the mic.
Great, thank you. Good afternoon, everyone. I'm Gina D'Angelo with the Connecticut Department of Public Health and also the DPH co-chair of our integrated HIV planning body. So we're going to share today how we transitioned our meetings to virtual platforms and some lessons learned as well. When COVID-19 hit, and I don't think my slides are up there.
I'm working on it. Let's
okay. When COVID-19 hit in March and we realized in-person meetings were no longer a thing, initially we just canceled the March and April meetings because we had some flexibility to add on meetings to the end of our planning year. But then we realized COVID-19 was sticking around and we needed to connect with our partners. So we made that quick pivot to a virtual space. Next slide. Okay, and I think next slide. So our first virtual meeting was in April. We started with our HIV funders group, which is made up of the leads of all of our Ryan White parts, A through F, HIV prevention, our area AIDS education training people, and more. And the meeting was really focused on the impact of COVID-19 on our programs and services, and it allowed everyone to get into a virtual room and start sharing some of their plans and their innovations. From there, virtual meetings were planned for all of our other groups, but not before doing assessments with our members regarding access to technology and Wi-Fi or data. So there was a lot of planning that was necessary, as about 50% of our membership are people living with HIV or community members with varying degrees of access and skill and comfort level using technology. So all our meetings that you see on the screen now are virtual. Our co-chairs actually meet weekly as opposed to monthly because we felt like we needed to touch base more often in this new world. And then our funders, our CHPC, which is our big planning group meeting, and that has 4 committees and an executive committee, they all meet monthly. We use the GoToWebinar and GoToMeeting as our platforms. And for us, it was really important that we keep the meetings simple. So they're shortened, only an hour, although we found in May and June they went an hour 15, so we're making that adjustment. They have a clear purpose with very defined tasks. And of course, controls in place to avoid any, virtual chaos, because I don't know about everyone else's planning groups, but ours can get kind of rowdy. So we removed also the non-essentials from the meeting space. So for example, meeting summary votes and community announcements are now done through an email process, just to kind of make it more clean. Next slide. We open our virtual meeting door about 10 minutes early, frequently welcoming folks and asking them to practice using the question or the chat feature. In May, we asked, what are you doing for self-care during quarantine? And in June, we asked them just to share something uplifting that they've witnessed recently. And that kind of gets them used to using the platform. Next slide. Our meetings start with a call to order, just to review the agenda and the meeting parameters, which is really important because we need to make sure that everyone who's participating knows the virtual rules of the road, such as muting of the mics and those kind of things. Next slide. We kept our normal moment of silence in play for people impacted by HIV, but then we added a separate one in June for our Black brothers and sisters who have been harmed or killed simply because of the color of their skin. You can advance the next slide. And the next one. And the next one. So our meetings basically have 3 components to keep them simple. The first is co-chair updates. And so what we wanted to do was really highlight the behind the scenes planning, partner updates, and innovations that are happening. So this slide shows our in-home test kit initiative that actually started pre-COVID but got a big boost by COVID. And also our telehealth services, which have become a really new effective strategy in reaching out of care people who would never come in otherwise, and we've been able to reach them since. Next slide. We also wanted to highlight our community programs like Empowerment that are thriving in this virtual world. They actually have more meetings going on now than they did pre-COVID. Next slide. And finally, we make announcements, anything coming out of the executive committee. We also report on our virtual or vote over email on our meeting summaries. So as you can see, our meeting summary was approved. And then announcements, like we decided all community members will still get their stipends, whether they can come to the virtual meeting or not because of access. And then we relaxed our attendance. So we wanted to make sure people were aware of that and that the next meetings coming up will be virtual as well. Next slide. So after the co-chair announcements, we do a quick 10-minute knowledge build. And in May, we focused on health equity because as we know, in the HIV world, we're no stranger to that issue, and COVID-19 has definitely shined a brighter light on it. So we want to keep talking about it. And then next slide. And so in June, the 10-minute knowledge build was on Ready, Set, Prep, and that was to increase information and resources and ultimately PrEP access and uptake for our people. Next slide. The third portion of our big meeting is our main presentation. So in May, we had Dr. Abuago, who's an ID and HIV specialist at Yale New Haven Hospital, spoke on COVID-19 and HIV. And then in June, next slide, our resident pharmacist talked about our new online KDAP system. So those are the 3 things that we kind of kept in play with our meetings. Next slide. Then our committees meet separately via a whole separate link in their own virtual space. And they really have just gotten back to business. In May and June, after having a couple months off, they just started ramping up their efforts. We have a G to Z committee that really started moving forward again. We're working on workforce capacity training, setting data indicators, and they very much have just dove right in. Our executive committee also has its own meeting space that meets after the committees do, so that those committee co-chairs can kind of talk about what's working well in the virtual space and what's not, how do we improve and plan for the future. Next slide. There are definitely virtual space challenges and successes, right? So we have to prepare everything in advance to keep in mind that some people will only be participating by phone and won't see what's on the screen. Access for community members has been huge. A few of our members have no devices and they refuse the loaner that we actually have loaner tablets that we can give them all, but several people have refused them and we're not 100% sure why. I also have, a few members who have no way to connect. They don't want to use their own minutes and they don't have Wi-Fi at home. So we're working on trying to troubleshoot with each individual member, trying to do what we can to provide access, even if it's purchasing a phone card for them. But again, I think there's a little bit of hesitancy on their part. They're a little bit overwhelmed with what's going on in the world right now. So we just continue to work with them, put in the time, put in the phone calls, say, hey, we miss you, we're thinking of you. Let us know when you're ready to connect and we'll try to connect with you. One really difficult one is our monolingual Spanish speaking member who we usually provide a translator for. And we even offered the translator would go to her home and help her connect virtually, but again, that community member said it was too overwhelming. No one platform works best, I should say that. We use GoToMeeting and GoToWebinar because GoToWebinar has a better sign-in and registration process for tracking attendance. The downfall is it only allows for a small number of presenters or people to be on camera. So GoToMeeting doesn't have as clear of that attendance tracking and system, but it does allow for more mics and cameras. So there's trade-offs, right? So for now, for our big CHPC meeting, we're using GoToWebinar to have that kind of controlled, productive environment without the chaos. And then for the committee meetings, we're using GoToMeeting because people really want to connect with their microphones and their cameras, and that allows them to do that. The other thing that's been a challenge is getting the same level of feedback we used to get from our in-person meetings. We used to get, I would say, about 40 feedback forms out of 60 participants. And right now we're only getting about 18 online surveys returned. The good news is the feedback's good from the ones we get, but the bad news is we're really not getting, as much feedback as we had in the past. In terms of our successes, though, our meeting participation is on par with our in-person meetings. Our partners are stepping up, loaning tablets and trying to help one another. And staff are working overtime. We've done actual practice sessions with consumers and community members so that they're more comfortable using the technology the day of the meeting. And then we do have some graphics that I'll show in a minute and some analytics about our meeting. Basically, our attendance is slightly lower than it used to be, but it's still good. And again, our meeting satisfaction in person versus virtual seems to be about the same and high. So those are all good things. Next slide. So here that just kind of shows you in May, the only thing we did really was use web metrics to measure our success. So we had 58 participants, and in person we would get 50 to 70, so that's not bad. All participants stayed the entire time, which was 15 more minutes than originally planned. We planned for hour meetings and they're all ending up to be about 75 minutes. 73% attentive rating and 80% interest rating with a very strong use of the question box. So we felt that was a good start. Next slide. And then we did send out a survey monkey for feedback. And basically what you could see with the attendance is, February was unusually high, but if you look at May and June, they're pretty much on par with January and with meetings of the past. Next slide. And then as far as satisfaction with the meeting, if you look at January and February, we were like 98% satisfied with our meetings. And then you look at May and June and we're right up there. So in terms of, although it was a small number of people that turned these in, pretty much meeting satisfaction remains high. Next slide. And this just kind of shows you, most people thought the agenda was clear and they understood everything and the virtual meeting format worked well. Next slide. And we always look at it from the member perspective and then the public perspective. And of course, there were a few people there that, maybe didn't understand as much as the members did, but still overall pretty good. Next slide. So suggestions for change that came on those forms, they want the meetings to be more interactive and with audience participation. They want us to use the polling feature, and they want to see faces and connect and allow for wider microphone use. So we're thinking about doing the polling and the microphone and camera use in July, expanding on that. But I think overall the message is people just miss the way things were and they want to connect. Next slide. So here are some tips for anyone that's going to embark on this. Really communicate clearly and often with everyone. That's your leadership, your members, all of your partners. And assess the access early on and continue that and identify any barriers and try to solve them. When we say access, do people have devices? Do they have internet? Do they have a comfort level with using them? And how about their skills? And how can you work with them to help them kind of come along? The third one is engage often. So make those calls, those emails, put in the time with the meetings and the practice sessions. People really appreciate that. And then finally, be flexible. Just make the changes that you need to your policies and your processes as you go. I think COVID-19 has helped us all to be a little bit more flexible and kind with one another. And I think that's, what we're trying to do. Next slide. So there are a lot of people that I could thank, but I'm just going to say it really takes a village.
Thank you, Gina. We really appreciate what you've shared and your perspective, and we will open up for questions after hearing from Yasmin and Andres. But as I said earlier, I welcome Yasmin, Andre, and Andres Acosta from Heart of Florida United Way, who will be presenting on how they are using digital technology. So let me unmute your line.
Well, hello, everyone, and thank you so much to Christina, to Nicole, to Rashad, and the other partners involved for inviting us today. My name is Yasmin Andre, and I'm the Director of Ryan White Programs, which includes our Ryan White Part B and our Planning Council support team. Can folks hear me okay?
Yes, we can hear you.
Okay, sorry. Like I said, it includes our Part B and our Planning Council support team. My colleague Andres is actually part of our Planning Council support team, and he's also a contributor to local community engagement partners. Could I get the next slide, please? So in late October of last year, Heart of Florida United Way received an opportunity to partner with our Florida Department of Health to conduct a needs assessment and some community engagement sessions that were geared towards providing recommendations for the draft version of the Ending the HIV Epidemic plan for Orange County, Florida. So we initiated a week-long series of events that included key informant interviews, community surveys, listening sessions, virtual and in-person town hall forums. Phase 2 of these activities involved reviewing activities recommended by the community and outlining any challenges or considerations that we needed to put on the table in setting priorities for these activities across the next 2 years, or I'm sorry, the next 5 years. So we had planned to continue these activities into the new year, but due to COVID-19, the outbreak and subsequent shutdown, we really had to redirect our efforts to a more virtual format. We opted to conduct 3 virtual listening sessions, 2 in English and 1 in Spanish, that were done in Zoom, and they were shared via Facebook Live. Over the course of 2 days, we recorded 105 unique Zoom participants, reaching approximately 1,000 people, and the videos collectively had over 650 views, which we feel really speaks to the success of these engagement sessions. And my colleague Andres will now actually go into more detail about the platform that we use and key strategies that helped us accomplish these listening sessions on the next slide.
Hi, everyone. My name is Andres Acosta, and I'm the coordinator for Planning Council Support. It is a pleasure to be here with all of you. So let's just dive right in. So as Jasmine mentioned, we had to move all of our efforts virtual, especially for the end of the epidemic. And when we're talking about platforms, GoToMeeting is wonderful when we have an official meeting, and GoToWebinar is great as far as the webinars go. However, when it comes to something where you're engaging the community and you want it to be low barrier, Zoom is the gold standard. The reason for that is that if one of our members does not have access, not have GoToMeeting downloaded on their laptop or GoToWebinar, they actually have to download it prior to being able to join the meeting. Whereas for Zoom, you can join it straight from the website. It makes it a very low barrier, and when you're asking individuals from the general public to give us their feedback, this actually helps out because it lets them join at very little hassle to them. One of the features that makes Zoom wonderful for something like ending the epidemic town halls is the co-host control and monitoring of the people that are joining the call. The reason why this was very useful is, in our case, and this was actually Jasmine's and Nicole collaboration. Nicole, awesome to have you here today. They decided to do breakout rooms to foster intimate conversations. What that meant is that while we had a large Zoom meeting where everyone was talking about the plan in an overview kind of way, we were then able to go into smaller breakout rooms, which really fostered those people that might hang back in a Zoom call and might, be hesitant to participate when there's an audience, to really open up and share their feedback with us. One of the great things about Zoom too is that it can simultaneously broadcast to Facebook Live. And once it is being broadcasted to Facebook Live, you're able to start separate watch parties, meaning that you can use the social media following of the individuals in your Zoom call to actually drive engagement and views towards the session. Finally, there are also captioning options for the hearing impaired when it comes to Zoom, which makes it great because it makes it more accessible. Next slide, please. So using social media is definitely key for engaging our consumers. I really enjoyed that at the beginning of this webinar, TikTok was mentioned by name. While, full disclosure, I did turn 30, so I'm past the age of TikTok. It is a wonderful way to engage our younger consumers. A perfect example of this is using micro influencers in your community to push your message to target populations. So if you actually look at the 5 different graphics that you have in front of you, those were all different co-moderators or co-hosts for our Zoom call for Ending the Epidemic, and each one of them represented a different target audience and has a respectable social media following within those communities. So it's not about going out and finding somebody that is, Instagram famous or something like that, but it's finding those micro influencers that have the ear of your community when it comes to your virtual platforms. You can also use Facebook as a hub for your events while seamlessly promoting and disseminating information on Instagram and Twitter. Those 3 are your main. Right now, they're just your main sources for social media engagement. Again, it is up to us to continue looking for new ways to engage people on social media. But when you personalize those promotion materials, it incentivizes sharing on social media as well. Anytime we have an event, we always try to make sure we include not just the face of the person that is going to be attached to the event, but also whatever agency they are collaborating with. So if you actually look at those graphics, we have Miracle of Love, AHF, the Bros in Como, which is a local initiative, and Hope and Help. And by including the agency affiliation and their actual logo, you are more likely to get those agencies to push out things on their social media, not just the Planning Council social media. Finally, you want to post to as many individualized groups as possible. What that means is that if you have access to a social media channel, for example, I control the Facebook for the Central Florida HIV Planning Council, there are many HIV specific or LGBT or trans or public health specific groups in the Central Florida area on Facebook. So once you make a post about a specific meeting, you then cross-post to all those individual groups so that you're making sure you're delivering your promotional materials to this targeted audience. A perfect example would be, we have a grassroots movement here called QLANX, and they have their own group. By posting things into their group, we're then able to tap into that microcosm of the queer Latinx community here in Central Florida. Finally, personally invite individuals to an event. That is a huge one. If you just post an event on Facebook, you're likely to get people that are interested in it. However, you as organizers have to make sure you go in and individually invite people, because that is how you're actually going to drive up engagement. And it's completely free, so it's the best cost-effective way to do that. Next slide, please. These are just basic examples. So the first one is the session that we had in Spanish. The second two are just examples of when the Zoom call went live on Facebook. You also include the login information in case people actually want to participate. One thing to keep in mind is that when you're broadcasting to Facebook Live from a Zoom call, it's very helpful to have somebody monitoring the chat on Facebook Live, because that way you get to double your engagements. You have individuals that are engaging through a Zoom call, and whoever drops a question into the Facebook chat, that question or that comment can then be shared in the Zoom call to all the other participants. Next slide, please. So the role of organization,
I'm sorry. So the most effective way that we found to mobilize the community in our area is to tap into those existing grassroots organizations in our area. So Andres mentioned, tapping into some micro influencers that are already doing the work in those communities that you're trying to reach. We've, already heard earlier on the call today that Zoom fatigue is very real. We can definitely attest to that. So a key strategy to help widen our reach is to invite gatekeepers in the communities to join the calls. And the way we decided to do that was not just to invite our micro influencers to help promote our event, but to actually moderate the event. So we referenced earlier the different breakout rooms that we sort of separated into to encourage people to engage more during the calls who would otherwise probably sit back and just kind of listen. And we had those moderators in each of those rooms helping to drive a lot of the conversation and capture questions. And after we would close the breakout rooms, those individual sessions would join a main room again, where we would again highlight some of the key talking points or key strategies that we needed to focus on in ending the epidemic plan. One of the challenges we had was that, because of COVID and the outbreak, we had very little time to sort of organize and get this together. And so we really wanted to make sure that for the next go around that we had enough time to promote the event effectively. And we thought we did a pretty good job given the time frame that we had, and we were really lucky to have some really great organizers and really great participants who helped us moderate these calls. And so we thought we did pretty good in terms of reach, but we know we can definitely do better. One of the other things that we did was we really encouraged folks both on the call and after the events to create space for more targeted listening session opportunities. We didn't want this to be the end of the conversation. We wanted folks to reach out to us and say, hey, I really like this listening session. I'd really like to do this for my community group that serves, X subpopulation of people. And so really creating and encouraging folks to reach out to us to tailor the conversations specifically to the groups that they want to reach in order to get more feedback on the plan was really important to us, so that we could have a more holistic perspective on how we were really going to tackle HIV or ending the epidemic in our county. We also made sure that we utilize bilingual individuals in our area to allow the message to reach different priority populations. So, one of the main ways we did that was having a listening session conducted entirely in Spanish. And Andres actually moderated that session. He did a really, really great job. But, you can use bilingual individuals within different breakout rooms as well, so that if you've identified folks who need, assistance with translation or something like that, they can utilize the platform in order to provide that assistance to those folks so they can really engage as well at the same time. And then one of the last ways that we sort of helped expand on this is to utilize our local planning council or planning group websites, both on social media and our main website, to host information on ending the epidemic. It allowed for our planning group to become an automatic ambassador to the message, and it also helped us to streamline the community feedback that we were trying to engage and solicit. So we put our survey on there, we directed folks to the fact sheet so they could learn more about the plan, they could send it out to their community members or friends or family or whomever. And it really helped to make sure that we were on the same page and sending out a unified message about what we were trying to accomplish with these ending the epidemic activities. And Andres, did you have anything you wanted to add to this?
Yes, actually, since this actually went over some things that the Central Florida HIV Planning Council was doing, in our area, due to the Sunshine Law, we have not been able to have virtual meetings as regularly. So part of the way that we've harnessed social media and really get the community interested into what Social Planning Council is doing is by featuring our individual members in what we call a Planning Council heart-to-heart. The reason why this is important is because it elevates the consumers that are already in your planning council and makes them micro-influencers in a certain way, because you're giving them a platform. What that means is that the next time around, when something does launch that is HIV related, that is planning council related, you don't have to go outside of your council to look for influencers. You've already creating them by using the individuals that you have in your council and elevating them and giving them a platform to shine. Thank you, Jasmine.
Thank you. And that pretty much concludes our presentation. So we're ready for questions whenever the folks on the call are.
Thank you. I do want to recognize that we are over the hour. However, we want to make sure that we do get through all of your questions. And I think we want to try for one last attempt to hear from our CDC partners. So for those who are able to stay on the line, we will keep the line open and we'll be addressing the questions over the next 10 minutes. So we'll see if we can get our CDC partners on. Maria or Erica, can you hear us?
Good afternoon, everyone. This is Erica Dunbar. Yes, I can hear you. Can you hear me?
Yes, I can. Thank you.
And Maria, are you able to join or listen in?
Just in Q&A.
Well, I did want to say, again, this is Erica Dunbar from CDC and Division of HIV/AIDS Prevention, and on behalf of myself, my colleague Maria E. Alvarez, who is, we're having a little bit of technical difficulties. It is our privilege really to participate on this webinar series today, and we are really looking forward in partnering with NASDAQ as we launch the technical assistance webinars for ending the HIV epidemic. And we want to be able to collectively address many of the ending the HIV epidemic community engagement and accelerated planning TA needs and themes that have been identified over the course of months, and some provided in the feedback to the recipients. And so we do remain committed to our ongoing partnership and provision of technical assistance. We also want to encourage that, in addition to our partners and colleagues at our state and local health departments, that we're also, reaching out to the community members and stakeholders. I truly enjoyed the examples and recommendations and creative ways to engage community and planning groups virtually. and really that importance of adding and focusing on new voices during this EHE local planning. So I don't want to take up any more time so folks can ask questions to the presenters. But again, we're looking forward to this partnership and more webinar and TA to come. Thank you.
Thank you, Erica. So now we do want to open it up for question and oh, Maria, is that you? Oh, thought I heard someone, but maybe not. We do want to open up for question and answer. So we'll start off with what has been asked in the question box, and then I'll go and unmute everyone's line. So the first question is, gathering consumer data via technology is often rife with confidentiality issues and security. How do we overcome those barriers as we move online? So I'll open that to either of the or all of the presenters, that, you know, Yasmin, Andres, or Gina. And also, if you want to, I know, Andres, you talked about sunshine laws, but someone also wrote Pennsylvania has sunshine laws that all state meetings must be open to the public. Do you have a message to address this issue? And I know you briefly touched on it, but is there anything else that you can maybe provide more information around?
Yes. So the first thing I would say is that as far as the sunshine law, some states have suspended their physical requirements for their sunshine laws. And if that happens, then by simply making your Zoom call, and obviously you have to check with your jurisdiction, but by making your Zoom call and your meeting open to the public, you're meeting those requirements. So if your state has suspended the physical requirement for your portion of the sunshine law, then that is a workaround that you can do. As far as collecting data from consumers and the confidentiality issues with that, you know, I would have to ask, what data are you trying to collect from them that you're worried about confidentiality? Because if we're talking about just simple non-medical data, then using something as secure as a Google form is not really that big a problem, especially if you're gathering input, community input specifically. And if you are gathering any kind of sensitive data, then at that point, I would just point you to your organization's HIPAA guidelines.
Thank you. And then we have another question that says, do you pay for closed caption feature? Does someone type the closed caption, or does the device translate the information? And you know, I'll leave that open to either of the panelists to answer. Has this come up really previously?
Great question that we have not actually explored yet, but we have been talking about doing more for that population. So I'd be interested to hear if Florida or anyone else that uses that.
Yes, actually. Oh, sorry. Go ahead, Jasmine.
I'll add to that, just because we did have to consider that as part of the scope of our work when we did the first round of our engagement sessions. We did, you know, communicate to the community that if they needed assistance with, you know, language services, or if they needed closed captioning or something of that nature.
One moment.
Hi, I'm sorry. I think I was muted. Can folks hear me now?
Yes, we can.
Okay, thanks. And so we did ask for the community to put in requests for that ahead of time, you know, similar to what our county government requires for any public meetings that require any language assistance services or something like that. But the Zoom platform at least does have the capability to either have someone assisting with closed captions or, you know, subtitling during the meeting, but you can also add in a third party or some type of support application to do that for you if that's a service that you do have or pay for. So I would definitely recommend that folks look into that if that's something that they consider is a need for their communities. And I guess that's what I would add to that.
Thank you. The next question we have is, what are some strategies used to engage hard to reach populations or organizations that you have not previously worked with? How were you able to get them invested? And I'll open that up to anyone who would like to potentially answer that.
Hi, Andrew. I quickly dropped something in the chat. Just to go back to what Jasmine was saying, if you go to rev.com, that is a great third-party app for captioning, especially for Zoom calls, and it's also very low cost. And as far as engaging new communities, one of the biggest issues that we've seen around that, and I can talk not just from the Planning Council perspective, but also from community organizing period, is that if you go, before you go in and before you try to create things that are specific to that population, especially centered around HIV, the easiest way to gain access is to find somebody that is already in that community, and then feature them and partner with them rather than you trying to go in and spread your message. The best example I can give is the first time that we ever had any kind of connection with a large congregation of Black women for a special religious event was because one of their members was on our planning council. So by empowering that consumer and inspiring that consumer to share her story, she then went into that population that we previously had no access to, and we were able to spread the message of the Central Florida HIV Planning Council while empowering that consumer.
Thank you. Along that line, someone asked, what incentives have been used with engagement activities? How are they distributed?
So for our first round of Ending the Epidemic sessions, we did offer gift cards for folks. We did also offer transportation reimbursement for folks who may have required it. But gift cards or raffles are usually pretty successful. We also make sure to offer food for in-person meetings. Now, those strategies are obviously not possible via a virtual platform like with Zoom. So that is something that we're looking to explore in the future for how we can incentivize folks to participate virtually. You know, whether it's maybe a raffle that's held offline, you know, and folks are notified after if they won a prize or something like that. But, you know, those are conversations we're continuing to have.
For us in Connecticut, our consumer members do get a $25 stipend a month for being a statewide planning group member. And we decided, as I had said earlier, to continue that because we know that, you know, people are going through really difficult times. So regardless, usually they have to come to a meeting and sign that they were there to get that. And we kind of relaxed some of those things a little bit. Also with food insecurity, you know, we usually feed them once a month. And so making sure that we are helping provide them with food, through gift cards or what have you. I think with our focus groups, we also always provide some type of a gift card incentive and then food if it's an in-person meeting. But we're trying to be creative and think outside of the box of how we can still support people, especially at this difficult time. And so we've kind of been a little bit more flexible.
A great way to incentivize individuals, especially if you're trying to get them to join a virtual event and they are not planning council members, is using the power of community and social capital. I know that the way that I was activated in my community was through other community members that I looked up to. So the moment you can actually tap into that social media power of my friend is doing this or I look up to this community member and they're doing this, the easier it is to activate members in your community and incentivize them to join an event that they might have otherwise not been interested in.
Absolutely.
Thank you. And, you know, we have one final question up here is what recommendations, if any, do the panelists have in regards to engaging vulnerable communities and consumers who do not have access to a smartphone or computer?
So for us, it would, I had said, I think in our presentation that, we have loaner tablets, we have devices, we have, we can give people phone cards. And I think the bigger issue is that there, a few of them have taken us up on it. A few of them have said yes, and we've done practice sessions with them, but there's still those members that just aren't really comfortable. And so just continuing to have the conversations with them, building the rapport. They all have mentors in our group. So really using the mentors to just really keep in touch with them and just to keep offering and to try to troubleshoot and see if there's anything that we can do to make them comfortable and to help them gain access. But, this virtual thing is not going to work for everyone. And we need to kind of, own that and do the best job that we can.
Absolutely. I would add to that, Melanie Cross, our planning council manager, she has done a really great job of splitting up our planning council members amongst those of us that are planning council staff, and we do have to engage with them once a week via phone. And the way that has been useful to really connecting to those vulnerable communities that do not have the virtual capacity is that a lot of our planning council members are active in those communities. So we've actually been able to receive feedback from the community and from the community members that might be, aged out of social media or just do not have the access or capability to engage that way.
Great. So I'm not seeing any other questions come in on the line. We'll see. Seems as if maybe the lines are not unmuting. If any other questions do come in on the line, we will be sure to answer those and get that out to everyone. I just also want to take note that our next webinar, Exploring Digital Resources and Strategies to Expand HIV Services to Community, will be July 14th at 2 p.m. Eastern Daylight Time. And this webinar is really going to be looking more in depth into the various digital and online platforms available, their utility reach, and how they can best support, facilitate community engagement. And then the last thing I'll say is that if you are interested in learning more about community engagement, cultural humility, responsiveness, social marketing, and social media use, those are available trainings at NASDAD. And feel free to contact me, Christina Santana, to learn more about these trainings and get you in contact to my wonderful colleagues who will be able to support you. I want to thank everyone for joining us today, and we appreciate your flexibility and your patience as we have extended past the 60-minute mark. But we really enjoyed this conversation, and I really want to thank our presenters, Gina, Yasmin, and Andreas, for taking the time to share with us what has been going on in their jurisdictions, as well as share how they've been able to move forward in the ending the HIV epidemic process. So we'll give you a round of applause, and we want to thank everyone for joining, and have a good rest of the afternoon. Thank you.
Thank you.